On the Buzz Meter this Sunday, the media are ablaze over Donald Trump Jr. as the New York Times reports and the president's son confirms that he met with a Russian lawyer who he was told had opposition research on Hillary Clinton.
It suggests on its face a willingness to collude with Russia, a foreign adversary of the U.S.
This interview is like his, I think, fifth attempt to defend the indefensible. Don Jr. is the latest person in the president's orbit to mislead you, the American people, about their contacts with Russia.
Meeting with a Russian lawyer is not treason. Listening to someone dig dirt on another opponent is not treason.
If there's nothing there, and that's what they tell us, if all of that, why all these lies? Why is it lie after lie after lie?
In any normal political circumstances, we would be at the end already. This would be the end of the road with the clear admission of guilt. The worst case scenario, yeah, we did it.
Trump derangement syndrome out in force today all day long. Donald Trump Jr. broke no laws, likely broke no ethics, election ethics rules.
Don Jr. defending the 2016 meeting, which he says went nowhere, with Sean Hannity.
In retrospect, I probably would have done things a little differently. Again, this is before the Russia mania. This is before they were building it up in the press. For me, this was opposition research.
Are the emails about this meeting as damaging as the press is saying? Why did Don Jr. hold them back until the Times was about to publish them? Are liberal commentators going too far in saying he may have broken the law? And does this change the media narrative about the Russia investigation? Brit Hume and former Bush White House spokesman Ari Fleischer join our discussion. Joe Scarborough says he's leaving the Republican Party and announces it with that other Trump critic, Stephen Colbert. Is this the latest form of anti-Trump protest? Plus, did an MSNBC contributor really rip Ivanka for what she wore to the G20? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. It was the emails that boosted this story into the stratosphere. The intermediary, this British tabloid hack-turned-PR guy, Rob Goldstone, said the Russian lawyer would provide Donald Trump Jr. with documents, quote, that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia, and that this high-level sensitive information was, again, quoting, part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Don Jr.'s response, I love it. The Moscow lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya offered a different account in an interview with NBC.
I can tell you right now, I have never referred to any compromising information about Ms. Clinton.
How did they get that impression?
It might be their desire to see that in my story.
The president's son accused the media of desperation and more.
They're trying to drag out the story, in all fairness. You know, they have it, they want to drip a little bit today, drip a little bit then. So I was like, here it is. I'm more than happy to be transparent about it, and I'm more than happy to cooperate with everyone.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident is concerned, this is all of it?
This is everything. This is everything.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Jillian Turner, a former White House official in the past two administrations. Katie Pavlich, editor of townhall.com. And Joe Trippi, the Democratic strategist, all are Fox News contributor. Jillian, Donald Jr. essentially confirmed the basic details of the meeting with the Russian lawyer. Some things are still in dispute. So is it fair to say that this is another case of fake news?
Well, he basically confirmed the details of the meeting in 4 separate disclosures. So there is something to be said for the drip, drip, drip nature of this, not on the part of the media, on the part of him. My bigger concern with this issue is, to me, these meetings are a matter for concern. They constitute, in a worst case scenario, a national security issue. But the media has so far so grossly over-exaggerated many of the scandals when it comes to this administration that the average person is going to look at this and think, oh, this is another Trump administration scandal. The media is losing their minds.
If everything's in 11, then nothing's in 11,
exactly.
As I often say. Katie, let's take a look at what the president had to say when this came up at a news conference in Paris.
I do think this. I think from a practical standpoint, most people would have taken that meeting. It's called opposition research. Honestly, I think the press made a very big deal over something that really a lot of people would do.
The press making a very big deal about it. Is the press making too big a deal about it?
I think the emails are a big deal, and it's because of what exactly the emails say, talking about this coming from a high-level government source from Russia, saying it was to help his father's presidential campaign. I mean, that is the first issue. The second issue is the changing story coming from Donald Trump Jr.
Who talks about the drip, drip, drip.
Well, right, and it's coming from him. Sean Hannity asked him specifically, is there anything else? And he said, no, this is it.
Everything.
And yet here we are, days later. We know that it wasn't just 1 or 2 people in this meeting. The meeting wasn't about adoption. There were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, highest level of the Trump campaign in this meeting. We still don't know what they talked about. And in terms of the president, the question has been all week, what did the president know? Was he told about this meeting? The Trump camp denies that the president knew this, but the president himself somewhat implied that maybe I was told about this meeting. So certainly is unclear.
We'll come back to that. But Joe, it seems that the media, rather than just reporting this as a embarrassing, possibly politically damaging episode, quickly shifted to, is it illegal, and kind of gleefully quoting some Democrats who were saying, oh, it may be treason. So I wonder whether, this is a real story that, again, is going through the media hype machine.
Well, it's a real story, but 2, it's going to go through the media hype machine, partly because the opposition Democrats are going to take advantage of it. But the other thing, I agree with Jillian, look, when everything's an 11, when the 29-second handshake is getting repeatedly run on the cable.
You're referring here to the president and the first lady of France.
Yeah. The 29-second handshake.
That was horrifying, wasn't it?
Yes. It is like, when that's like a big deal, it detracts from when this really is a big deal, partially because Donald Trump Jr. It wasn't everything, and it keeps dripping out. That's a problem.
Just to clarify, so you had the initial statement on Don Jr.'s part. I am told that he wanted to actually put out a more detailed statement, that this is what White House officials came up with, saying that the meeting was primarily about, this Russian lobby adoption-related issue. Then came the second statement, which said, we were told, as they were told, that there was Oppo research on Hillary Clinton. And then he posted the emails on Twitter after being told the New York Times was about to publish them. And then day after day after day. And then we get this on Friday. Take a look.
NBC has learned there was someone else in that controversial meeting. Also in that June 9th meeting at Trump Tower was another person with alleged ties to Moscow, a Russian-American lobbyist, a former Soviet counterintelligence officer, suspected by some U.S. officials of having ongoing ties to Russian intelligence.
Oh, a former Soviet counterintelligence officer. Doesn't this sort of thing, as it dribbles out, fuel media suspicion that we're not getting the whole story?
Of course it does. I would say that these kinds of details are real, like who exactly was in the meeting, was it 6, 7, 8 people, are really important to an investigation. And those standards will be upheld in a court of law in the ongoing case in the investigation. But when it comes to the court of public opinion of the American people as reflected by the media, they're actually holding the administration, rightly so, to a much higher standard. They want to know that generally their president, their commander-in-chief, is acting with integrity at all times, is acting with transparency, and is putting the national interest at the forefront of everything he's doing. And it's this kind of story that really calls that into question. And I think that's what the media is grappling with as a whole right now.
All right, so Time magazine put up the cover, has got Donald Trump Jr. on the cover, red-handed. Tell you something about the media mindset here, Katie Pavlich. And is there a sense, I mean, look, the position of the president and the Trump campaign is Oppo meetings go on all the time. Right. Yeah, it was with Russians, but nothing happened. But is there a sense among many of the pundits that, this time we got them? They've been saying no collusion, no collusion, no collusion,
right.
And there was this at least attempted collusion.
Well, and then this is why the administration and the Trump campaign would argue they aren't going to come out and continue to talk about this story, because even in the case of Don Jr. releasing the emails, they're coming and saying, well, you got caught, you were lying. But there's some credibility to that in the sense that the story has changed multiple times. But in terms of the credibility factor here, The administration doesn't have a lot of credibility on the story because of the changing narrative. And the media, quite frankly, doesn't have very much credibility because we've heard this storyline before. Alleged ties to the Kremlin, alleged ties to counterintelligence excuse me, operations in Russia, and those stories have been wrong. And so, as Jillian was saying,
wrong or exaggerated,
right,
or it's hard to see what's at the core here.
Someone watching goes, okay, the administration can't get their story straight, the media certainly can't either. Who are we supposed to believe on this? We'd like to focus on other things like Obamacare.
But the other thing is just the continuity of their response throughout this. You know, Flynn, I mean, the coverage of Flynn, and that wasn't true. There were no meetings, and it turned out he lied to the vice president. He's gone. I mean, then you look at Sessions recusing himself. So this is the first time where it wasn't the fake news media saying something. It was emails provided by Donald Trump Jr. And so I think having that fact, a lot of the media, a lot of journalists jumped on that because it was something that the White House couldn't push back against.
There have been a number of conservative commentators and news organizations that have said, well, yeah, this looks pretty bad, or we can no longer give the president and his people the benefit of the doubt. And some of these were never Trumpers from the campaign. At the same time, when you have pro-Trump commentators saying, well, you know, the bottom line is lawyers say it's not illegal, it seems to me that's not that great a defense. I mean, it is probably not illegal. I don't think there's any great liability here, but that doesn't mean it doesn't look bad.
Well, and that's the point I was trying to make less eloquently than you previously, which is that in the court of public opinion, people want to not just know that the President of the United States and his team is following the letter of the law, but that they're actually acting, again, in the national interest with integrity in all their interactions, especially in their interactions with foreign adversaries. And so this is exactly the kind of story that fuels mistrust and skepticism and doubt about the president. That's what makes it so dangerous.
Katie, you mentioned questions. I think the whole coverage next week is going to be what did the president know? Right. And with Yahoo's Mike Isikoff reporting that Trump lawyers were told more than 3 weeks ago about these emails and the meeting, which also included Jared Kushner, as we'll talk about, and Paul Manafort. That may shift. But it also strikes me that now we have all of these colorful characters, the British PR guy, and he represented the pop star whose father was politically involved, and the PR guy, Rob Gold, he's kind of like the Kato Kalin of this soap opera. Does that make it a more interesting story for people whose eyes may have been glazing over about all this?
Well, it certainly makes it more interesting, that's for sure. But in terms of the Trump campaign, in retrospect, looking back, they probably wish that they didn't let so many people like this close to the top tier of the campaign. I mean, looking at the meeting itself, if it was really a low-level meeting, it wouldn't have been Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Donald Trump Jr. at the meeting. It would have been a low-level staffer or an intern going, and yet here we have them meeting with this cast of characters.
All right, let me get a break here. We'll have more on this after the break. Ahead, Ari Fleischer on how this White House deals with the press. But when we come back, why are some of the media now making this Russian meeting story about Jared Kushner? Well, Donald Trump Jr. set up that campaign meeting with a Russian lawyer. Many in the media want to make the story about Jared Kushner, who sat in on part of the meeting and has become the target of liberal attacks.
Jared Kushner is in more legal trouble for that meeting than Donald Trump Jr. is, or than Paul Manafort is. Much more, 5 years more. Now, I know many people would wonder, well, who would do that to their brother-in-law? Who would leak a story that makes their brother-in-law look like an idiot, even if their brother-in-law is an idiot?
Lawrence O'Donnell in his inimitable style. Katie Pavlich, by all accounts, Jared Kushner did not engage this meeting, and he left there for a few minutes. Now, it's fair to criticize him for not disclosing the meeting on his security clearance form. His lawyer says that was submitted prematurely and was later amended with more than 100 other contacts. But why is the press now trying to make this about Jared?
Well, there was an allegation that the emails came from Jared Kushner's legal team. That was the allegation, so that is part of this story.
I think it's confirmed that they discovered these emails in the course of researching.
Exactly, so that's why he's coming into this in a bigger way. But the issue is that Jared Kushner is the reason why Donald Trump won the presidency. He had an operation going on to target voters. He was behind, the strategy of getting Donald Trump elected in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, and he was behind the scenes for a reason. He didn't go out front and cause problems for the president on the campaign trail or now. The media hates Donald Trump. They want to take him down, and they know that Jared Kushner is really the guy running the show at the White House and the one telling the president what to do.
But I think this is much more fundamental. I mean, Jared Kushner is the only one of the three in the meeting that is in the White House.
Works as a White House official.
Has a security clearance, does all those things. I mean, so I think that's what is the sort of sea change in these emails, is that now the investigation or the evidence has implicated him.
And he is not only a senior and influential White House official, but he is the president's son-in-law. And I think all of those in the media who would love to attack the president on this feel that they would like to scuff up Jared Kushner. And so it strikes me, since it wasn't his meeting, I mean, you could say, yeah, he sat there and then he left, but it strikes me as the focus is a little unfair. Do you disagree?
I think, again, because he is the only one of them that's in the White House, that's why the focus has come to him, fair or unfair.
I think, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, that many in the media resent Jared Kushner because he's a young, wealthy guy. He's got huge responsibilities in this administration. Obviously, the fact that he's married to a Trump is why he's there. And he almost never gives on-the-record interviews to the press, and so he's an easy target. He kind of keeps his head down and does his job.
Well, he is an easy target. I agree that the media seems as a whole terribly, terribly biased against him. But that said, he's got a target on his back, not just because he's young and he's wealthy and he's successful and married to the president's daughter. He's got a target on his back because the president has made him a foreign policy advisor. Not unofficially, not behind the scenes, an actual foreign policy advisor. And I would argue, he's an envoy for Middle East peace. He's traveled to Israel and the Palestinian territories representing the president. He's traveled with the Secretary of Defense to Iraq and met with foreign heads of state there. He's been involved in every foreign head of state visit to the White House. But there have been lots
of influential people in other administrations who don't get this kind of negative press treatment.
Yes.
So just the fact that he's got responsibility.
Maybe they don't get the negative press treatment, but they get that attention and focus, and rightly so, from the media.
And none that I know of took three attempts to fill out their forms correctly, and only admitted or altered the forms once evidence came out that they had to say something, which is going to.
You know what would happen? What would happen to any civil servant in Jared Kushner's position would be that their security clearance would have been revoked.
Let me come back to the coverage and ask you this, Katie. When people go on television who are sympathetic to the president and they say, well, you know, Hillary Clinton did that, and Hillary Clinton's emails, and Hillary Clinton and Ukraine, those may be legitimate stories, but is it basically a deflection?
I think it is. I mean, yes, the Clintons did very bad things. That's why people voted against her to put Donald Trump in the White House. This argument that because Hillary did it too, then it's fine for Republicans to do it after they've been campaigning against the Clintons for 20 years doesn't seem like a standard that Republicans should want to live by. If it's not okay for Hillary Clinton to do it, Republicans shouldn't think it's okay for them either.
Washington Post ABC poll out this morning. 63% say the Russian meeting was inappropriate, including 1/3 of Republicans. And by the way, you know how the President Trump's meetings or conversations with foreign leaders often seem to leak. London Sun reporting today on transcript of his conversation with British Prime Minister Theresa May, possibly about a possible visit to London. I haven't had great coverage out there lately, Theresa, says the president, and she replies awkwardly, well, you know what the British press are like. Katie Pavlich, Jillian Turner, Joe Trippi, thanks very much. Ahead, Britt Hume suggested this meeting was kind of a farce. What does he say now about the media coverage? But up next, White House aide Sebastian Gorka ridicules CNN's ratings on CNN. What's up with that? One White House official making the TV rounds on the Russia probe this week is Sebastian Gorka, who made a point of dumping on CNN.
Let's let the viewers judge, who decided that you are now at 13th place in national ratings, behind Nick at Night, which is at 11.
You used that line on Monday, and you know it was sort of mildly amusing on Monday.
Tucker Carlson gets 4 million viewers. You barely scratched 800,000.
But I think it's funny that you have enough time in the White House, which is apparently you're so busy, you're able to sit around and read Nielsen numbers. Which
no, I get a really good prep from my team because the White House press team is superb.
My suspicion is because he gives interviews like that and insults us the way Donald Trump likes.
It's like Don Rickles. That's his shtick. It's like the Hungarian Don Rickles.
Jillian, Sebastian Gorka also told CNN's Alison Cameron that people like cartoons on Nickelodeon more than they like CNN. Does it make sense for a White House official to do that and attack the ratings of the network he's on?
I think that it makes sense from a political optic for somebody from the administration who works on the communications and the press team to do this. I don't think it's appropriate Or even, I don't think it's even safe for somebody who's advising the president on counterterrorism to take on that role. And I don't know if Dr. Gorka has assumed that role unilaterally or if he was instructed to assume that role. But
well, he told Hannity, let me just jump in, that somebody has to be the president's pit bull, and reportedly the president has been very pleased with his performances. What do you think, just to turn this a little bit, of how Anderson Cooper handled it, particularly coming back after Gorka's not there to defend himself and saying, well, he's the Hungarian Don Rickles?
I mean, that was kind of funny. But I'm one of those people that cringes when I watch cable news battles where people are really attacking each other like that. I never think that that's a good thing. And I don't understand why administration officials who don't even have press and media in their portfolio are the ones out front on this issue.
Well, because they're aggressive surrogates. And CNN, by the way, is third in the cable.
But here's the difference, Howie. Sebastian Gorka, as a counterterrorism advisor, is not a surrogate.
Well, if you represent the White House on TV, you're by definition, in my book, a surrogate. CNN, by the way, third place in total viewers for cable news, but had the highest rated second quarter in its history. Okay, in a very different category, Kellyanne Conway, a contentious 35-minute interview with CNN's Chris Cuomo. Let's take a look.
The snarky looks, the furrowed brows, the rolling of the eyes from so many people on your panels, and you know it. You guys have made a business decision to be anti-Trump. Okay, the country
And you
can
guys
see
have
that.
also made a decision. You've made a decision to be antagonistic towards the media, to lump us all together.
Your take.
I think the issue is much bigger than Chris Cuomo versus Kellyanne Conway or Anderson Cooper versus Dr. Gorka. I think really what this is about is that the GOP, for the first time, maybe since Watergate, since the 70s, has a leader who is willing to go attack dog style on the media, and I think that is working for the party. And I think there's
particularly among Republicans, you're saying?
The GOP. I think there's a behind-the-scenes consensus among all the leadership, House, Senate, and White House, that this is something that's working for them and that they actually appreciate, and that's why we're seeing it go on for so long.
Jillian Turner, great to see you this Sunday. By the way, we're talking about rhetoric on television. Fox's Lisa Booth on The Five the other day said Hillary Clinton would literally sell her daughter to be president. I thought that was over the line. And Chelsea, by the way, went on Twitter and said she disagrees. Ahead, what's behind Joe Scarborough's big announcement that he's quitting the Republican Party. But first, the president tweeting this morning that fake news is distorting our democracy. Britt Hume is on deck. President Trump is tweeting this morning from his New Jersey golf course with all of its phony, unnamed sources and highly slanted and even fraudulent reporting. Fake news is distorting our democracy in our country. Joining us now is Britt Hume, Fox's senior political analyst. And Britt, when the president goes off on fake news, especially fraudulent reporting, on this particular story about the Russian meeting, haven't all the essential facts been confirmed by his son and the emails that came out?
The released emails are the heart of the story. They confirm the truth of the event. And everything that has come out of Trump world, especially from Don Jr. since, confirms that the meeting occurred. And the question is what the meeting means. It's not fake news. Now, the arguments about the extent of its culpability and import, you can argue when it's fake news. But that's really not news. That's opinion and analysis. So I don't see fake news applying really here.
You said on air at the beginning of this week that this whole business had elements of farce and was almost laughable. With the information that's come out since, is it a little less funny? Have you revised your view a bit?
As a political matter, this is a big deal. But as a legal matter and as a wrongdoing matter, what we know about this, or at least what we've been told about it, does make it look like kind of a fiasco. Trump Jr. gets lured into this meeting by promises of material about Hillary Clinton, which apparently never materializes, and the conversation turns to an issue of interest to the Russian government, which is this. The woman pretended to be an adoption advocate. What she really was,
U.S. sanctions.
She was a U.S. She wanted sanctions lifted, and he didn't have any power to do that, and apparently he said so. The meeting. I mean, think of this. If this meeting was really going somewhere, does Jared Kushner get up and walk out after about 7 minutes?
No,
and Paul Manafort sit there on his phone the whole time.
So is the tone of the coverage overheated in light of what we know?
The tone of the coverage is overheated to the and the reaction, I'd say, including the coverage, is overheated to the extent that we had the man who ran for vice president just a few months back, less than a year ago, said we're now getting toward treason. And that, of course, received wide coverage. And the coverage was kind of not necessarily sympathetic to that, but not unsympathetic either. It was an extraordinary statement. There has been extravagant conclusions are being drawn from this.
Right. And the Democrats like Tim Kaine are fueling them. And you got into it a little bit on Twitter over a metaphor, which is if someone tries to rob a bank and you get there and the vault is empty, have you done something wrong? And some people were debating with you over, well, a bungled attempt at collusion with Russia is still
collusion nonetheless.
Yeah.
Well, it's a semantic argument, but my thinking about this is that the analogy that I thought was overdrawn was the one where you go to the bank and you break into the vault and you don't find anything in there, and therefore it's just, well, this doesn't, I just don't think this reaches that level. This looks like Trump Jr. and his unbelievable naivete was willing to sit down with this woman to discuss the presentation of this opposition research.
Yeah.
And he gets to the meeting and apparently, so far as we know, no opposition research of any consequence was presented, and the effort to do what the woman really wanted to do went nowhere. So it looked to me more like, if you were going to use the bank robbery analogy, that you had a meeting to discuss whether to hold a bank robbery and you didn't end up with a plan, you didn't end up doing anything.
All right.
That's my argument.
So one of the president's lawyers, Jay Sekulow, did the full Ginsburg today. That a reference to Monica Lewinsky's lawyer doing all 5 Sunday shows. Sekulow was on all of these programs. Let's look at some excerpts of those appearances.
You know that goes on in campaigns all the time. Opposition research is a big part of campaigning.
It doesn't go on with the Russians all the time, Jay.
Well, no, but look, here's what happened. First of all, nothing happened. There ended up being no exchange of information.
Isn't it also important whether or not it's legal, whether or not it's wrong, whether or not it's ethical?
The legality, was the meeting and what took place legal or not? We, of course, and as almost every legal expert said, it's not illegal.
Do these appearances and the emphasis on, well, it wasn't illegal, which it probably was not, is that helping the president's case?
Well, you're never really on side. I mean, there are 2 ways to look at this: as a sort of a legal matter, which is important. You know, if they did something illegal, that's a big deal. And even sort of whether it's a legal matter or even impeachment material, which doesn't require necessarily illegality as we think of it, not a violation of the criminal code. And the second way to look at it is, what about the political effect of this? In other words, whether it's legal or not, there's a propriety issue. Is this the proper way to behave? Is this an ethical way to behave? The answer to that, I think, is assuredly no.
Well, there's one other advantage of having someone like Sekulow out there, and that is you don't have Sean Spicer or Sarah Huckabee Sanders or White House officials.
And, you know, he's combative, and that's fine, but you're never really on good ground politically when what you're saying is that what your client or the person you're supporting did was not illegal.
Not correct.
But there have been so many claims made, advanced.
So you can see them wanting to combat that, yes.
You want to combat
One more tweet from the president this morning. Hillary Clinton can illegally get the questions to the debate and delete 33,000 emails, but my son Don is being scorned by the fake news media. There was that incident with the CNN debate. Does that kind of deflection please the president's supporters?
It probably does, but his problem really now is not one that I think can be solved by tweeting. The problem is that the meeting was never previously disclosed. And when it was disclosed, details were omitted, although I don't think they necessarily added anything to it. And I'm not sure it was a dishonest withholding of the information.
Right, but the dribbling out didn't help.
That's right, it didn't help. So we're now in a situation where you have probably not much of a legal problem, but a serious political problem. And the kind of whataboutism is about saying, well, what about what they did?
Yeah.
You know, that makes a talking point for the supporters, but it doesn't change the question, which is, okay, what came of this? Was there really a collaboration between the Russian government, directly or indirectly, and the Trump campaign? These tweets don't go to that question, and that's the question that has to be answered, and that's why this isn't going away anytime soon.
I see a lot of pro-Trump commentators saying, what about Hillary Clinton? It's not that that's not legitimate, but it does seem to be a deflection, and she's not president. Brit Hume, great to see you this Sunday. Really appreciate it. Ahead on MediaBuzz, Ivanka Trump at the G20. Did an MSNBC commentator really say Ivanka Trump let down the sisterhood with a girly outfit? But first, Ari Fleischer, who's been at that podium on whether it's smart to move most of the press briefings off camera. Let's dig a little deeper on how President Trump is dealing with the media uproar over his son, especially now that most of the briefings have been moved off camera. I spoke earlier with Ari Fleischer, the former White House press secretary for George W. Bush and now a Fox News contributor from Connecticut. Ari Fleischer, welcome.
Thank you, Howard.
Good to see you. When the New York Times goes to Donald Trump Jr. and says, we're about to publish your emails, and we'd like to have your comments, and then he preempts the paper by posting them on his Twitter feed, what is the fallout from that?
Well, the fallout is pretty tough because what newspapers and media have an obligation to do is go to a source and say we have info. And that way they can have a story that includes your reaction to it. And that's good for people on my side, the communicator side of the podium. But if you then take that and preempt the media, next time the media needs something from you, they're going to call you 10 seconds before they have to file their story. They'll get your quote and they'll hit send. And that doesn't help you in the long term.
Right. As a matter of White House damage control with the press, something you have some experience with, how damaging is it when, in the case of the president's son, his first statement, the first White House statement to the New York Times said, well, it was a meeting primarily about adoption. And then the second statement says, well, we were told that this Russian lawyer, had some Oppo information on Hillary Clinton. That was the pretext. And then on Friday, NBC reports there was another person in the meeting who happens to be a former Soviet military counterintelligence officer. How does that help the White House case to have it dribble out like that?
This is a classic case of how not to do it. The lesson in Bill Clinton's White House taught everybody how to do this was that when you have damaging news, get your arms around it yourself, put it all out in its entirety and do it yourself and do it on day one. Instead, the Trump White House did the exact opposite. They are the ones who stretched the story out from a one-day story into at least a 4 or 5 day story. And so I just don't understand the White House thinking that they could keep those additional details secret. Surely they should have learned by now the press is never going to stop digging.
Right, and there are a lot of leaks in this government, and eventually these details would leak out, so get out ahead of it yourself, turn it into a 1 or 2 day story, as you say. This whole question of the way this story about Donald Trump Jr. has oozed out came up at a briefing the other day with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Take a listen.
Sarah, I want to ask you, the drip, drip, drip is undermining the credibility of this administration.
I think it's actually undermining the credibility of the media because they drip, drip, drip a lot of things that don't seem to have much to do about nothing.
Undermining the credibility of the media, not the White House, when the story comes out piece by piece by piece?
Well, here's the core issue, and that is how significant is this meeting, or is it not significant at all? And Howard, I would say to you, as somebody who's been critical of the Trump White House and of Donald Trump Jr., how they've handled this, unless and until there is evidence that Donald Trump or his campaign collaborated with Russia on the hacking of the Democratic National Committee emails or Podesta's emails and or worked with WikiLeaks on its dissemination, that's the collusion that is the damaging collusion. This meeting was bad judgment. It should never have been done. It was foolish. It was an opening to Russia that nobody should open to Russia. But I don't see the crime in the meeting. And that's, right, I think, the distinction that the White House wants to make here. I think it's a valid distinction.
I'm not saying
it doesn't forgive having the meeting.
Anything illegal, but it does not look good. I think we can agree on that. Now, you may have noticed that was an off-camera briefing by the Deputy White House Press Secretary. As somebody who stood at that podium many times, they've now moved most of the briefings to audio only. They seem not to want the televised briefings. Now, that may cut down on grandstanding by TV reporters. I'll grant you that. But does it also inhibit the administration's ability to get its message out?
Well, former Press Secretary to Bill Clinton, Mike McCurry, and I have long advocated taking the briefing off of live TV. Let the cameras be in the room, but embargo it all so you cannot use any of it until after the briefing is over. The purpose being to tone things down so it's not such a red-hot TV show. And frankly, I think everybody in Washington needs a tone down. Everything is so fast, so furious, so dramatic, so breaking news, so red-hot. And that's not what the country wants out of Washington. And so taking the briefing off, downplaying it to some degree, is good for the body politic. It's good for the White House. It's good for the press corps. And it will take time, though, because this White House is still pretty red hot.
Right.
And so the issues are hot. But I think still it's fundamentally the right thing to do.
I've got half a minute, Ari. You, some years ago, worked as a contributor at CNN. President Trump, as you know, constantly bashing CNN as fake news. Do you buy that assessment? Fake news?
Well, I think the media makes a lot of mistakes, and that's how I phrase it. And if I see somebody do something wrong, I say that. I do think the mainstream media, Howard, is largely liberal. I think there's no question about that. It's so much easier to be a Democrat dealing with the mainstream media than it is to be a Republican.
And Ari Fleischer, you would know from your years of service in the Bush White House. Ari Fleischer, brand new Fox News contributor. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Howard.
After the break, MSNBC's Joe Scarborough bailing on the GOP, but why would he do it on CBS? Plus, did Pat Robertson give the president the friendliest interview ever?